For centuries, the LGBT community has been rejected by all sorts of religious institutions. One of the most influential of those institutions is, of course, the Catholic Church. In 2013, the leader of that church, Pope Francis, made international headlines for saying that he won't judge homosexuals. The statement was widely seen as a radical statement, departing from more traditional church teachings. Now, the Reverend James Martin, a Jesuit priest, is explaining how he intends to foster a better relationship between the Catholic Church and the LGBT community. He writes about it in his book, Building a Bridge.
The church, of course, has always been opposed to same-sex relations and more recently same-sex marriage, which wasn't even contemplated in, past centuries. And there are those sort of theological and religious reasons, but then there are just social reasons. The church reflects the culture of the place where it is, and so, before I would say maybe even 50 years ago, there was intense homophobia and hatred of LGBT people. We remember before Stonewall in the, I think, 1960s, I guess, people would be rounded up and carted away for going to gay bars and things like that. So the church, of course, is made up of real-life people, and those real-life people often had very homophobic attitudes towards LGBT people, and I think that was magnified by the religious background. And so LGBT people have really felt marginalized and have been marginalized in the church.
Martin says he hopes that marginalization can stop and that the injustice will only ever stop when his fellow Catholics can get on the same page and reframe their thinking.
The most important thing is simply to get to know them and to listen to them, to listen to their experiences, to treat them with, as the Catechism says, respect, compassion, and sensitivity. So my book is not really looking at any church teaching. It's basically saying, we need to treat these people like they are human beings, which they are, and like they are Catholics, which they also are. A lot of times people forget. They say, well, can you be LGBT and Catholic? And that's not a question. It's like saying, can you, have blonde hair and be Catholic? I mean, these people are already baptized. They've had First Communion and confirmation, and they're just as much Catholic as the Pope, their local bishop, or me. So it's a question of reminding them that they are just as much a part of the church as anybody else, and really going out of our way to letting them know that because of all the persecution they face.
Unfortunately, Martin says stories of homosexuals facing persecution within the church are all too common.
Recently, a 30-year-old man who's autistic told me that a pastoral associate, meaning like a pastoral assistant in his parish, said that he could no longer receive communion because he had come out as a gay man. Now, this guy's not in a relationship. He wasn't sexually active, as far as I know. He had just come out. So to tell someone he can't receive communion just because you're gay is not only against Catholic teaching, it's also just cruel. Another woman told me that she worked in a hospice in the western part of the United States, and the local priest assigned to the hospice, like the parish priest who would go to visit people, was refusing to anoint a man to give him last rites because he was gay, while the guy's dying in his hospital bed. So, you hear these things and you realize just how persecuted these people have been and excluded and marginalized. And, you could term some of that emotional or even spiritual abuse.
Martin says that one of the most important things people need to understand is that being homosexual is not a sin.
That's not a sin. I mean, that's not a sin in even in the Catechism because we don't choose it. So that's the great misconception. So simply being homosexual is just not a sin. And that's one of the things that we need to remind people of. I mean, it's no more a sin than it is to be born left-handed or right-handed. Now, you can have questions about same-sex relations and same-sex marriage, but that's one of the biggest misconceptions. It is not a sin to be gay or lesbian. It just isn't. And so people have that in their minds, and they think that, that gives them the right to treat these people like dirt, but yeah, it's just false. So that's the first thing we need to tell them.
Martin says that, biblically speaking, the sin associated with the LGBT community is the sin of having gay sex. Even still, Martin says sexual immorality is not a disqualifier to being a Catholic.
In the past, LGBT people, all they have been told about is sex, 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 sex. And they're the only group that we reduce to questions of sexual morality. So if a new couple comes to see you, and, you're just talking to them about, as a priest, you don't focus on, are you having sex or not? I mean, there's so many more questions about their upcoming marriage, questions about How are you going to live together, finances, conflict resolution, dealing with their parents, how are you going to raise the children in terms of their religion, on and on and on. And the idea that, the LGBT person's sexual morality has to be put under a microscope, I think is really crazy. And so what I'm trying to do is to move the conversation to other important parts of their lives. And one of them is participation in the church. And we really don't hold any other group to the same standards as we do LGBT people. And why is that? Again, it's prejudice. It's because we can.
Martin says he sees the double standards some religious individuals hold regarding sexual morality all the time. He says there's a simple question people should ask themselves if they treat homosexuals as less than because of their sex lives.
Do you treat straight people the same way? So the other people who are therefore sinning is everybody who's divorced, right? So that's Jesus comes out. Jesus says nothing about homosexuality, but he talks about divorce, at length in the Gospels. How do we treat divorced people? Do we treat them like the worst sinners in the world? I mean, this is Jesus himself, castigating them. No, we do not. How about people who are living together before getting married? No, we do not treat them the same way we treat gay people. How about people who are cruel or unforgiving or do not help the poor? I mean, these are real sins that Jesus points at. We don't really care. And so, again, it's this kind of selective focus on LGBT people as the only sinners while we give everybody else a pass. So it really is discriminatory.
While writing his book, Martin stumbled upon a statistic that LGBT youth are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. He argues that statistics like that cannot be accepted, and he says religion can and should lead the charge in reaching out to LGBT youth.
It shows how much they feel hated, and it shows how much they feel, to use a phrase from the Bible, a people set apart. One of the statistics I found that's really horrifying is that the majority of LGBTQ youth who are on the streets, who are homeless, come from families who have rejected them because of religious reasons. So oftentimes religion has played a part in these suicides and in these feelings of despair that lead people to even attempt suicide. Something like 40% of transgender adults, for example, have attempted suicide. I mean, that's a colossal number. 40% of all of those people. And a lot of this comes from religion. And so one of the things religion has to do, first of all, is apologize. And second of all, is to help reconcile these people to their church and more importantly, to God, to remind them that God loves them. That is the most important thing that we can say to any person, but especially to a person who feels so rejected.
To help people feel less rejected, Martin says he hopes the modern church can turn the tide on the history of discrimination against homosexuals by remembering 2 of the core beliefs all Christians hold.
First of all, we're all sinful. Second of all, Jesus also asks us not to judge. He specifically says, judge not. And third of all, again, it's only the LGBT person who gets this kind of scrutiny. We simply do not treat straight people that way. The divorce is a good example because we know many divorced people, and we know many divorced people who go to church and who are part of their church groups and might even be church leaders. We know many people who, are not generous to the poor, right, who do not forgive. And these people all are in often positions of leadership in the church, and no one bats an eye. And what we do is we have this bright line that divides LGBT people from everybody else. And why is that? Well, because we're homophobic. That's the main reason. And we haven't been invited to see them as full people. And once you get to know them as full people, you see them in their complexity.
The Reverend James Martin's book, Building a Bridge, is available now. For more information about all of our guests, visit our site at viewpointsonline.net. You can find us on Twitter at Viewpoints Radio. Our show is written and produced by Evan Rook. Our executive producer is Reed Pence. Our production director is Sean Waldron. I'm Marty Peterson.